everybody who's tuned in. I know that I cannot see you, and thank you for keeping your audio and video on mute so we can focus on Eric and all of his brilliance today. Eric is our guest, our fifth alumni founder of the semester, if I'm correct. He is here as an alum of the class of 2003 at William & Mary. He majored in philosophy and religious studies. So we've had a lot of philosophy majors, even our last AFS, if you guys had tuned in. Justin Schoonmaker was also a philosophy major, so we may get into why that's a trend among our alumni founders. So he was philosophy and religious studies, and he is the founder of the Franklin Fountain and Chain Confectionery alongside his brother. So it's family business. And President Rowe actually frequented the Franklin Fountain in Philadelphia, and we just learned that her favorite flavor was mint chip. And I thought Eric had a little example of that with his setup over there. Yeah, so thank you all for joining us. The way we're gonna do questions today is Eric's gonna do a little demo for us, and then I'm gonna have questions, and then you all are gonna have questions. So if anything comes up throughout the presentation, while Eric's talking, while I'm speaking, please feel free to throw it in the chat. And then at the end of the conversation, I will pick back up on your questions and hopefully unmute your video so that you can ask them face-to-face with Eric himself. All right.
Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah.
And welcome to our house community. And William & Mary, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your platform. I figured during this time of quarantine, I would share intimately what it's like in our house. So I opened up our 3- and 5-year-olds Victorian playhouse and kitchen set, and also pulled some things out of our real refrigerator, because you don't really know somebody until you look in their freezer or their refrigerator to know how they live and what choices that they make. So I actually, a friend of mine who's kind of one of my dairy mentors, he gave me some what's called kefir grains, and I had never heard of milk kefir until last fall, and he gave me these that he had been cultivating since the 70s. And essentially what you do is there are these grains which I'll show you, and overnight you steep milk in the kefir grains, and the next day you drink them. And there's a lot of applications to it, but one of the things that's kind of interesting is if you have for instance, milk that's kind of going sour a little bit in your fridge, maybe you bought too much at the store. You can do a lot with milk that's souring. You can put it in chicken and cook with it later. But I actually, because the end result with milk kefir is sour, I don't mind the taste as much. I've learned to actually enjoy the sourness and then sweetness later. So I've kind of tried to pull a lot of sugar out of my diet throughout the day, and then really splurge when you have it. So basically it just sits, and it's kind of a little gnarly looking at first. You may not be familiar with it. And I just strain it, and it just goes into a strainer. And I have this every morning, as long as I have milk in the fridge. You can do this too. You can actually buy kefir grains at your natural food store, and essentially you strain it, and it almost looks like cottage cheese when you when it's together, and then as it strains out, it almost the bubbles, which is it's a fermented it's a ferment, much like kombucha is a ferment. It actually ferments overnight, and you can actually ferment it for a couple days, but essentially it's a living organism, this is actually living, and they occur naturally in the atmosphere, and it's a tradition that came from somewhere outside of Russia or um, Central Europe. And then I just kind of poured into my, I like to drink my milk out of like a milk glass, like a vintage milk glass, and that's an old Harrisburg Dairies milk, and they called it most honored milk. They were very proud of their milk, Harrisburg Dairies, and I can sort of pour it. And in the morning, I also like fresh fruit with my kefir. And the way I've been encouraging my kids to enjoy yogurt is with some maple syrup. Of course, you have to have something sweet if you're asking children to enjoy it. So I've been playing around with flavoring milk kefir, vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry and raspberry, maple. So I'll just for the sake of anyone who wants real sweetness, but you can do that. And you can add fresh raspberries right in if you like, blueberries. It's really actually it's a health food. It's a nice way to start the morning. It's filling, and it's also kind of it's got probiotics. And you can dress it up if you want. You can put whipped cream on it. Anyway, the reason I wanted to show you that is because we have a choice in quarantine, really, to focus on our food choices and where we get our sustenance is largely from our foods and how well or how much we sleep. And so I think it's a choice that shouldn't go unnoticed outside of quarantine. And so in the case of milks, you have a lot of options, or maybe you don't. And so I don't want to make assumptions about that. It's scary sometimes when you go to the grocery and everything's been sold out, or you don't have a cow in your backyard, so you have to rely on food stamps. I mean, there's people that don't have access, and there's food deserts throughout the world and out the country. So I don't want to make light of it, the choice, but I do think that it is an important choice that is part of a healthy life. So this is just to get started, and like a little milk on my mustache. It does a body good, as they say.
I love it, Eric. Thank you for sharing this with us. Oh gosh.
And a couple other dairy traditions I wanted to share.
Yeah.
At Easter, growing up here in Pennsylvania, my grandmother was inspired from the Pennsylvania Dutch using onion skins to naturally dye their Easter eggs. So this is the last remaining naturally dyed Easter egg that I'll probably eat for lunch today. But I just wanted to show you what you can do to go about doing things naturally. And it's really quite beautiful. There's only one in the world that looks exactly like this.
Wow.
And it was a fun project the night before. Well, the Easter Bunny had a good time making cabbage and onion skin natural dyes. And that's a fun tradition in the home with milk and eggs. And another one at the confectionery. This was some holdover St. Patty's Day Irish potatoes, and Irish potatoes were a confection that was reminiscent of the immigrants in in Ireland coming over because of the potato famine. And so so these confections were developed and became popularized in confectionaries in Philadelphia. So there, for us, we use real cream cheese in these confections. So there's real dairy in them. They have to be refrigerated, and they are sweet. So if you want sweet, they're covered in cinnamon, and they are definitely sweet. Nice to pair, complement your milk kefir. We do these other things called buttercream eggs. This is just a half-pound egg, so they're quite large.
Wow.
They can get to be 2 pounds. We make them quite large, but there's butter in the cream egg, and then of course there's some kind of milk powder that's processed into the milk chocolate. So dairy is a big part of confectionery, not only in ice cream, but in confections in the products that we make. And, so for me, I'm excited. I love the dairy industry. I love learning about it, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the kefir, just to mention it. It's like a community that's both complex and highly variable in the basically the chemistry that's going on between the acids and the sugars in order to make a good culture in dairy. It's very much like a good culture in a community. So there's a lot of interesting parallels, I would say, between the dairy industry and what we're trying to accomplish at Franklin Fountain.
Eric, that's beautiful. You don't even need me. You can do the interview all by yourself. I love this. I love it. I mean, so many of my questions for you kind of have to do with that sense of community that you've fostered and intentionally fostered since founding Franklin Fountain. And so to speak to that, just in preparation for this interview, I was browsing on your website, checking out, how this whole thing got started, and you have in like big bold letters, you say, integrity is everything, right? And so I was wondering, like, what role does integrity, does the idea of owning your own personal story and cultivating a narrative, such that you've already shared with us so much of where you're coming from. What role does that play in entrepreneurship and in running your business?
These are really good questions. The integrity piece, really, when I was at William & Mary taking an architecture class, actually, my senior year, I was studying the role at the turn of the century that materials in architecture were sort of a philosophy of life. And Violette Leduc and others that were trying to use nature as an inspiration for their architecture, but also using the Industrial Revolution sort of in a combined way, where it was a very interesting problem and creative process that I started to share with my brother. And it actually was that dialogue about materiality and integrity in the material itself that joined us to say we could build something together with marble and real wood and with metal ceilings and with glazed penny tile flooring. So the integrity piece of doing something would basically be bringing our background as a family in antiques to the general public. Really, we were seeing that the antiques world is a very specialized luxury space that kind of went onto the internet, and antique shops were going out of business, retail shops. So our culture doesn't have access to understand why antiques matter, and we wanted to sort of use the ice cream business as an agent, uh, sort of as a form to, as a vehicle, really, to express ideas. And so integrity started with the shop, the way the store's built out with silver-plated brass spigots at the soda fountain from 1905, and then really move into the product space and the people space, because once you can't have an experience without guest servers who are genuine, and also products that really elevate the experience. And so all of those things, from the space being a third place, the people being hospitable, and the product being exceptional, it kind of elevates it into an experience. So we were really in the experience business.
Wow.
The second question you asked was, let me just say it again, just a word.
Sure. I just said, what role does the
Sonia,
idea?
can you say one word? I just forget.
Oh, one word of the question, you mean?
Yeah. I'll remember.
So, owning your personal story.
Oh yeah. So owning the personal story is very, very important. And I think that to stay connected with your community, it requires ongoing communication. And the reality is, when I was a 22-year-old and started the shop, or started thinking about the building of the shop the day after I graduated and started my apprenticeship one day later, my life has changed. I don't live in the city anymore. I have 2 children. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Kirsten, and we have undergone tremendous life changes. And the story has changed for us personally, but the intent is that the experience for customers remains. And I think that actually is okay for people to like recognize that, just because I'm not working behind the counter every day, that they can still come in and get their favorite flavor. But in order to make that happen, there's a company that needs to be built, and we've been fortunate to be able to serve a lot of guests in that community.
That's incredible. I love that. We hear a thread throughout these interviews, at least I do, of, I was doing this, or this was my plan, and, family and changing locations and different things, life just, it intermingles with entrepreneurship. And so thank you for highlighting that for us.
And I will say, I mean, in terms of identity, personal identity, and wrapping that up in the business, these are crucial times right now where we're sort of asking ourselves, who are we and who are we serving, and how do we serve to sustain the business? And right now, most scoop shops are closed in America, and we're all losing the spring and summer sales, and that's really devastating for most retailers, small businesses particularly. So the question then is, how do we get our products to people safely, in a way that is preserving the brand integrity? And I think one of the realities has been, our brand has garnered national and international attention, which has been wonderful. And we're so thankful to serve guests from outside of our country, from Spain, from Italy, from uh, China, from uh, all parts of the world. But obviously, tourism is going to be extremely down this year. And, you know, in some ways, we have to build back the neighborhood, that neighborhood scoop shop. Feel that it was in the early days, the first 5 years, when it was just Ryan and Eric and mom and dad, and you know, just putting in the sweat equity into it. We're having to kind of reconnect in that way and say, well, we're actually having to pivot, probably be a smaller company and be more strategic about how we get the brand out there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that acknowledgement and awareness that you brought to this conversation about how these are really difficult times for a lot of small businesses and for a lot of small business owners. Do you have like some grounding? What do you ground yourself in during, you know, these difficult times, you know, personally, and when you're, you know, reaching out to that community that you've built at Franklin Fountain?
Well, I do think having a wide set of friendships is really important. Leaning in on our family is really important, and remembering our traditions in our family runs really deep. And for me personally, having a spiritual journey and a walk and relationship with God is grounding, and it helps me to have and find quiet time, particularly through classical music. Beethoven is, I've been listening through the symphonies, which are just incredible and almost euphoric in their emotion. And I highly recommend getting out into the woods and looking at the creeks and the birds, and we're able to stop and slow down and not hear the cars, and to just to be more present and practice mindfulness. Listen, become more part of nature and part of the culture a little bit more deeply.
Awesome. Yeah, I know I'm definitely missing a lot of the woods that we have on campus and a lot of that stuff. It's definitely a more beautiful natural area.
I was wondering about Matoka, and I was wondering, oh man, that must be pristine right now.
I know, especially this time of year, I find myself really missing going down there. And that kind of speaks to another one of my questions for you, which is, you know, how did your time at William & Mary shape what you've done since then and the way that you've been in the world since then?
Well, William & Mary was full of friends, and that has continued, which I'm so thankful for. I was able to explore many subjects, from golf to stone sculpture to biology and chemistry and math and really the religions of the world, philosophies. And a friend, or a professor, who I highly admire, and I admired, Professor Holmes, David Holmes, recommended that I study philosophy because I was an idea person, and I wanted to explore what that meant. And so I ended up majoring in philosophy, and it was actually a French teacher that recommended Camus and some of the French existentialists. And I actually think that when people are sort of forced isolation, in some ways, I think this is where some of those ideas came from during occupied France, because they were sort of forced to recognize that that they still had choice, and freedom is found in choice. And I think it's important that everyone remembers that we do still have choices. That it's not, it may feel very much like we don't have choices, but we can find freedom and a sense of space in those choices. And that to me is a kind of reassurance that there have been many that have gone before us that have walked much, much harder roads than being in quarantine. But the philosophers of existentialism were certainly into survival, and I think it's important to tune in a little bit to that.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, we're getting so many takes on like different philosophy major founders. So it's definitely, I can tell now you're still kind of in that idea man kind of space. That's wonderful. Amazing. All right, so if you're just joining us now, just a reminder that please feel free to throw your questions for Eric in the chat, and I'll get to them in a couple of minutes. Until then, so do you have any words of wisdom that you would give to somebody looking to found a small business, or that you would share with your younger self when you were taking those first steps?
Well, some people may be discouraged when they're told no, like it's not a good idea. That just reinforces someone like me to prove them wrong. So I would encourage people to shoot if their heart is in something, that they're going to, even if they make a mistake or if they fail the first time. There are many people that have failed many times before they've succeeded, and really that's just how life is. We have to believe in it. So if we realize that selling something is at the end of the day selling yourself, you have to kind of just trust that, and it's going to be okay. And even if it's not perfect the first time, trust me, I've made a lot of mistakes, both in the kitchen and with customer service. But you know, you're going to just try, and that's all that anyone could ever expect.
It sounds like you have a lot of grit, which is one of our entrepreneurial thinking pillars at the Entrepreneurship Center. Do you have like a funny example or a story to share that kind of revolves around that grit kind of mentality?
I love that word. I mean, there's a mascot in Philadelphia called Gritty. He's the Flyers mascot, the NHL hockey team in Philadelphia. And of course, I have no inhibitions to cold call anybody, including President Rowe. I wrote her a letter, and she actually wrote back.
Oh my gosh!
She's incredible. But I'm just saying, don't underestimate yourself and the power of the word. And I just called, you know, we make a gritty chocolate bar, right? It's like large sugar granules. So I just call people and say, you know, how about a NHL like hockey puck chocolate bar? Like, how cool would that be? We reached out to the Pope, the Pope's when he came to Philadelphia, and sure enough, we were honored and asked to serve a flavor that would be inspired by him. it was such an honor. But I'm just saying, if you have an inkling, any kind of just all it takes is a little seed, a little granule of something to kind of push you in that direction. Take it, see where it leads. Don't discount it because the plan hasn't been figured out completely. The whole Benjamin, our inspiration with Benjamin Franklin came from a small little newspaper article I read. It was like two sentences that the Ben Franklin Houdin bust was being exhibited at the National Gallery. So the very day after graduation, I visited that place on the way back to Philadelphia. And that was inspiring of the Franklin Fountain idea in the first place. And then our shop being right on his block. So all I'm saying is don't underestimate the small. And that goes true with Rocky and Gritty and anybody in Philadelphia, but everybody has a little bit of Rocky inside of them too.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I love the Rocky movies. I'm from New Jersey, so not too far away.
Yes, New Jersey.
Yes, it gets a lot of bad press.
It's the Garden State. It's the Garden State. There's so much beautiful, beautiful food grown in New Jersey, and the chores. I love it. We actually worked with this hazelnut project at Rutgers hazelnut farm, and there are these disease-resistant hazelnuts in northern Jersey, and we're making amazing chocolate bars and chocolate sauce with those New Jersey hazelnuts. It's really delicious, and it's fun. It's fun to actually connect with agriculture, and I feel like agriculture was one of those subjects. I wish I had more time at William and Mary to study, but to look at the lens of agriculture, the subject of agriculture, but through the lens of the liberal arts, I think is where a lot of innovation can happen. And our system is quite broken. So we really need a lot of entrepreneurs coming out of liberal arts schools looking at agriculture.
Incredible. I mean, that's a perfect segue into, we have a question from Savannah, who's actually part of our team here at the EC, and she wants to know, you briefly mentioned a plethora of courses and ideas you explored when studying at William & Mary, but I was wondering what in particular you found most beneficial when making choices about coursework, internships at William & Mary when you were starting your business.
Well, actually, starting the business really good, almost was like a second generation business in that my family my mom had an antique shop in our front room of the house we originally grew up in. And so being a small business owner was just part of the dining room conversation. And my aunt's family actually was in the ice cream business, so I apprenticed with her side of the family, and it was really learning a completely other thing called industrial food manufacturing that I didn't learn at all at William and Mary, but I applied. Now, public speaking and learning about the world of ideas landed me my first job across the street at I think someone wants to be on camera.
Oh my gosh, well, we love it.
We'll do a Zoom bombing here.
Yeah.
No, I was a tour guide at Christ Church, where Ben Franklin and Betsy Ross went to church. And essentially, I was very familiar with the ideas and the religions of the founding fathers, and the history side of things at William and Mary. In colonial Williamsburg, people dressed up at the taverns serving 18th century meals. That I was sort of like, I was steeped in that tradition of serving tourists food in a time period. We were just basically changing the time period to the 1920s in Philadelphia, and kind of with the Franklin connection.
Got it.
Sorry, it's a little bit confusing, but I was kind of pulling experience. I would basically pull experiences, not necessarily from classrooms, but from my strengths. And my strengths tended towards like looking outward and seeing opportunities where there were none. There was no homemade ice cream, American style ice cream business in Philadelphia, let alone in tourist Philadelphia where the Liberty Bell is. And no one really making a specialty of that. So we just saw an opportunity and we went with it. And it happened to be on the same block as America's oldest candy shop. So we bought the candy store and renovated it, and we still operate hives, and so we have a couple 100,000 bees working up there that we're harvesting for Mother's Day, and we'll be doing personal deliveries to people's houses for Mother's Day.
That's fantastic. Oh my gosh. Personal deliveries will mean so much right now, especially, during this time.
Yeah, that's kind of what the old milkman, like the glass bottled milk delivery service is all about. This is actually a Virginia dairy that was distributed here in a local Whole Foods.
Wow.
I try milk wherever I can. That was a non-homogenized milk, which means the cream went to the top and it's not it's not mixed. But anyway, it's interesting how what's sort of old is new again a little bit, where people do want to feel connected to someone that they can trust, and that kind of is sort of happening again.
Yeah, it sounds very William and Mary in that, trying to be innovative, striving for the future, but also remembering tradition and incorporating it. All right, well, we have another question from Graham, and our director that you met earlier, and he is asking, what do you look for in a teammate? What are the non-negotiable traits versus the things that you can teach or train when they get there?
I think certainly attitude, a good attitude is, for me, number one. The skill sets are sometimes different for different parts of the company, like front of house versus back of house, kind of like divide them. We have front of house people who are like interfacing with guests, and they need to be able to smile in an interview. And if you can't smile at an ice cream shop interview and want to serve guests, that to me is like kind of a common denominator. You need to be able to find something that you're happy about and smile about it. Even smirks, we'll take a smirk. But back of house people tend, we look for other skills that, relate to little, organization and cleanliness and production efficiencies and data kind of people. But you kind of for a well-rounded company, you kind of need skill set, a wide variety of skill sets. But if it's helpful, actually, if you can talk about your experiences on a school team, because work work very much has everything to do with, like, let's say you made the softball team, but you have a problem with like the star pitcher because you think she's like a little full of herself. Well, maybe that's just a problem with your perception. Maybe you need to work through that somehow and talk about that at an interview. And I will say that maturity of just talking about working on a team and how you broke through and became like best friends with that pitcher is exactly what good bosses are going to want to hear about. That they're going to want to see how you took a situation and maybe like took the emotion out of it and gave a little grace and tried to work things through.
Amazing. That's a great answer. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the question. Do you have more?
I think that is all from our question feed, and we are just about out of time, but this was lovely, Eric. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia. It's a pleasure. I only hope that happiness and good dairy find you in the future.
Thank you, Eric. And to everybody who tuned in, here is the check-in and feedback link. We'd love for you to paste it into your browser and give us some feedback for future events so we could have more awesome guests like Eric. But thank you so much, Eric. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and I'm so glad we can make this happen.
Cheers.
Bye. I wish I had my own ice cream. Bye.
Buy you an ice cream.
Thank you so much.
I'll see you in Philadelphia.
See you then, Eric.
Take care.
Take care.